Hey, welcome to Smoker Broker. I'm Robert Mesh, and I'm the guy they call Smoker Broker. Hope everything's going well for you guys. We guys came back last week for the first time in a while, and it was nice. It was great to get back and get into the podcast realm of things. It's something we enjoy doing. So had a great conversation about interest rates and the the objections we're having and the stupidity of it and the misunderstanding. It was a really good show too. I really enjoyed listening to the guys talk about that. So I'm going to take a different route to this week's episode, and it's one that hits near and dear to me. I think anybody that works with me knows it's probably the number one principle that I really focused on, and that's attitude. But I'm going to do something different today and combine it with knowing your role too. Not like The Rock, not like know your role, not that one, but something similar, because I think that attitude itself, when you're talking about positive, and that's absolutely part of this conversation. But the other type of attitude is it almost falls into entitlement. It almost falls into my attitude is that I'm entitled to this or that. So there are different forms of attitude as far as I'm concerned. You have the positive vibe, the negative vibe, which is the one we usually are focusing in on. But you also have that attitude of, no, I should be able to do this. This is me. This is my right. This is not. And unfortunately, we live in a country that is filled with people who are entitled. They think they're entitled. They think they're owed. They think something's theirs. And I'm probably going to focus on that side of it more than anything today. As always, got the guys with me. Like I said, they're the ones that really run the show. They know what it is. They know a lot more than I do about it. Got my longtime buddy down there, Brent Holberg. He really runs the show for me. And then I got Gary Ritchie, runs a lot of our show down in San Antonio. Plus, he's a longtime mentor of mine. And then I got my longtime friend down there, Mike Dallas, who's a hell of a realtor, just too damn quiet as far as I'm concerned. And that's probably why he doesn't sell as many houses as he should, but love having the guys on. They really are the core of the show, and their input is just invaluable in this conversation. And I probably wouldn't want to have anybody else on a show like today, because each of them are probably the best representations of the type of attitude you want to have. You're not going to have. Well, actually, this is a really good point that I was making earlier. Someone like Brent, his attitude is beyond the positivity of it. It's what makes him go. It's what makes him capable of doing the things that he do. But then you can do the other type of attitude. Does Brent have attitude? I'm like, oh yeah, he's got plenty of that. So there's two different sides of it. Mike's a good example. Mike's a very positive person. You would know it, especially by his outlook. He's a super positive person in his outlook of life. If you look at him, you'd swear he's just like lost his 10 dogs or whatever, and someone just shot at him. But his attitude internally is good, right? He knows. So there's different types that we're looking at today. And Gary's attitude is Gary's attitude. He's been like that for years now. He's just he does the best he can with the way he knows the good and the bad. I'll tell you something about Gary that's something that I love, and many things I love about him. But it's a principle that actually does have meaning for today's session, and one of the reasons why I'm doing this particular session. Gary can get horrific bad news, and he's not going to violently react to it. He's not going to start throwing things or screaming at things because he knows he just doesn't get anywhere with it. He's upset by it. It bothers him. But that's something that over the years I've learned to do just as well. You can only go so far with as bad as it gets. You can only take it so far. Gary's very good. I mean, he's very good at a lot of things on the positive side of it, but he also, his attitude when things are really rough, he's able to take it very well. You can't see it in his face. I'm trying to remember who I was talking about or talking to. Brent, I can't remember if it was you yesterday or not. I don't think it was, but we were talking about getting out of line. And when someone sees it in your face, that it almost makes you look weaker if you're the one who's reacting to it. And even though you weren't the problem. And that's another attitude phase as well, is that sometimes the person who created the issue is making you look like the fool because of the way you address it. And it's unfortunate because they're the ones that set you off, but your reaction to it is probably just as poor. So all of these, the first initial point of the show is to acknowledge that, look, there are many different types of attitudes, right? But the one I want to focus in on is the entitlement one, because we have a problem. We have way too many people that believe that they have an entitlement to something. So we're going to start with real estate agents in general. The real estate agent that is starting and they're not doing what they thought they would be doing, which is basically about 99% of the real estate agents out there. Because the truth is most agents don't do that great their first couple of years. It takes time. Well, that's a fact. And you have so many agents that they start and they do the gung-ho, you know, they're like, all right. And it seems like it's a 3 or 4 month wear off. And then once like the honeymoon's over, they start looking at, hey, nothing's happening. And they start pointing fingers and they become entitled to themselves. And they start saying, well, look, it's clearly the person I'm working for that's causing this. You know, not clearly the person who's in the mirror, but clearly somebody else's problem. And you start getting, some people could label this as blaming somebody else. That's not the way I look at it. I look at it as an entitlement. I look at it as them saying they think that something is not being done right because they're failing. And that's when you get into an attitude perspective of, hey, look, it's not me. It's so I could be doing better somewhere else. I'm like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. I mean, if you were so freaking good, why couldn't you do it there? You can't possibly think that the switching of some color is going to make you better, or someone else telling you the same thing that the other person told you to do is better. It becomes entitlement. I've had several agents over the last few months, and some I like, by the way. If you're watching this, that yes, this is part of the conversation. It doesn't necessarily mean I'm fingering you out, but I am kind of still making the same conversation. I love it when I see them switch and they start throwing up their social media ads and doing all these things that we have been telling you to do for 2 years and never did it once. But now all of a sudden, like, oh, I'm somewhere new and I got to get going on this. I'm like, congratulations for doing what you were told to do for the last 2 years. And finally you're doing it because whatever reason somebody else told you to do it. You know, the entitlement and the attitude of the person is that, oh, this will make me better. I'm like, I got news for you. Nothing changed from you last night to today. You're the same person you were the day before and probably the last week before and maybe even the last year before, unless you've had some type of lifetime change that where you saw the light and you switched everything. And most don't. Most people have an attitude that they're born with. Attitude's the worst to teach because it's almost impossible. It is almost impossible to teach somebody to have a good attitude. They're raised with it. A lot of times if their parents are reflective of it, and I'm not going to, God knows anybody who's a parent would never like the comment that, well, I'm responsible for the way that kid is. That is not true. I've seen very good parenting that were like, how did I know that they were going to turn out like that?
Are you talking about me?
Well, I didn't want to say anything, but yeah.
I probably have the worst attitude on the inside. Whereas if a problem goes up and everybody else blows up, I'm going to be like, I'm screaming all that on the inside. I'm going to be cool on the outside and be like, well, we're just going to handle it. Let's just get it done. Let's just go with it.
You know, Mike,
we'll get pissed off later.
You
go scream at your wife.
Gary is.
Well, I'll find somebody to yell at.
I believe Gary's like that. I think Gary, because I've seen some of the things that he's seen before, and I want to shoot somebody. And he probably does too. You won't see it in his face, but he's a lot like you. I know both of y'all very well, and y'all come from different time frames, but I'm telling you, I'm both the same that way. Both of you could hear it and be like, Jesus, you know, inside, starting with every F-bomb. but you wouldn't see it verbally because you'd just be like, it's not gonna go anywhere with it. So that is true about an attitude on how is that person going to react. I mean, what is going to happen with them. So I like the internal thing there because I think it does matter internally.
But and Robert, and yours and Brent's defense, because you are very openly emotionally vocal with your attitudes, whereas Michael, I don't know Michael as well as you do, but I've seen him under a couple of distressing situations, and he reacts to things much the way I do. It's kind of like, okay, all right, and we kind of sit back, and you roll around, have your fit, get all that over with, and they said, okay, now that that's done, what are we going to do to fix this?
Yeah, see, now I like that comment because you just assessed exactly what my point is. Brent and I are more animated, more blunt, and more opinionated, and let it go out, whereas you and Mike are not. But in the end, the same result is going to occur. What are we going to do about it? So now the problem I have in this particular episode are those ones that do everything that we just said, whether it's your way or our way, but they're still stuck on blaming somebody else, saying it's their fault. It's because of this. I should be doing better. I am owed more. And that attitude proceeds, and then they go somewhere else, and either the same thing continues, which most of the time is the case. I got news for any broker out there that's ever had an agent go somewhere else. And we have our retention ratio is extremely high. I mean, we don't lose that many people. So for us, this is not a bigger conversation, but I've tracked the ones that have left over the years. There ain't nothing that's changed in maybe but 2 of those people. They are no different than they were before. They want to believe they are, but they're not. They're the same. They know it. I know it. I know them intimately. I know how they were when they were with us. I know what they do today. Nothing has changed. But at the time, something needs to change. I mean, nothing needed to change. It's the attitude. It's your attitude that you felt needed to change, but really it was your attitude that should have changed where you were at. And you start realizing that the problem is in front of you and you got to fix it. If you felt like you were owed something more because somebody else is going to give you something more or something less, and you were going to be better off. And that's where that entitlement comes into. I mentioned about the know your role type of thing. So the know your role type of thing comes from you're starting to also get to a society that has people that are coming into an industry with no experience at all, 0. And they're starting to make claims or demands of other people. They're the ones that are saying, this is the way it needs to be. Sometimes when I'm doing any type of, whose background is that? Can you guys hear that background? Hey, Mark, I don't know if that's yours or not, but we can hear whatever's going on in the back, or whoever that is, Bellis, or I don't think it's any of you guys, but we can hear a background, whoever it is. All right. But you start getting into these people where it talks about their roles and stuff. They actually think it's their place to say something. They think it's their place to make comments. Someone who's new, well, that's not the way I would do it. I'm like, great. I'll just put my 25 years aside and we'll go with you since you know so much. Something I see sometimes too is and right back to the attitude, the comment from somebody who, whether it's being negative or they disagree, or maybe they're deciding to go elsewhere. They want to give their opinion on what you should be doing. I'm like, let me get my pad and pen and listen with your vast experience. The entitlement of that person. I'm like, you're kidding me, right? You're telling me in the year that you've been doing this what to do. If it's someone like Gary telling me that, I do have my pad and pen, and I am listening, and I am sitting there saying, okay, I'd like to hear it. But the person that's been doing it a year, 2 years, 3 years, I'm like, you're joking, right? What attitude did you have to make it think that you're going to offer some type of change when you haven't even seen what it is that we do? And that entitlement level, that's where you start getting to know your role. I'm like, you really ought to back down and look at where you're at right now and really think, am I the one that should be making that comment? Am I the one that should make that type of comment to this type of particular person? Because that's where entitlement crosses in. Someone who has no business saying something like that, or the way they talk to you. I think that's the one that gets to me a lot too. I don't mind pretty much anything, but attitude, I'm super big on. And it's amazing when someone who's new to an industry that you've been trying to help, that doesn't know much, and they throw attitude back at you. I'm like, oh, that's just great. I go, that's great that you're at this point in your life that you think you're the one that should be talking to someone like a supervisor or anybody else that way. Like, who taught you that? Where did you grow up and say, this is okay? I'm not going to listen to them. They're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. Again, different if it's somebody that's been in the industry as long as you. And that's why we're talking about know your role. I don't want you to get lost in this conversation because that's exactly the point I'm making. You got people that are different years of experience. It's one thing to take constructive criticism, but it's another thing to take it from someone who really doesn't even know what they're doing, and they've decided to, give their input and their attitude with it. Even if me and Gary disagreed, I'm still going to listen to him. But someone inside of year 4 that starts barking off and getting upset about something, like, how are you raised to talk to someone at 2 different levels? And you're like, that's okay with you. How do you inside say, I think I can teach this person something. I think I can tell them something. I'm like, what? What? You haven't even tried this yet. You don't even know. I mean, I appreciate you saying you have an issue, but, and just so you guys know, this is from a series of events from not even necessarily in my life, but in other people I've been listening to for the last 3 or 4 months, just watching the same type, whether it was mother, father, whether a son, father to son, mother to son, whether it was peer to peer, friend to friend. I've seen this multiple times where I'm like, why would that person even think that that's their position to say and that they feel entitled enough to say that? So you get to know your role that says, I'm out of that role and I'm going to say this. And then you get the attitude that makes you think that you can say it. And you combine the two, and it's a toxic environment. It's a bad thing because you got someone who's really talking to them like, I'm not so sure that you're the one who should do that. You've got people who you show how to do things and they embrace it. And then they become entitled enough to think, well, I can do that better. I'm like, well, you're welcome for us showing you how to do that. You're welcome that we've taken the time and the blood, sweat, tears, and beers to do it. But it's pretty awful that the response is, hey, look, I can do this better than you can. You suck. I don't like it. I can do better this way. So I'm just going to go ahead and do it. I'm going to use the things that you showed me how to do, and I'm going to be better. I'm like, okay, great. That's fantastic. Because when you start getting to things like that, it does become that level of when you were raised. How are you taught that? It almost I'm not going to compare the two because I think they're different. And I think all of us still were in this age to where we didn't call the adult by their first name. We still called them Mr. or Mrs. and, sir. We didn't. But today you have someone that's just like, hey, John, how's it going? I'm like, God, I still can't do that. It's still hard for me too. So it's an embraced attitude, and it can be generational based. I think everybody would agree that the attitude of just the pulse of the average person out there probably isn't where it needs to be. I think you throw in entitlement, and then I know it's not where it needs to be. I mean, Brent, what do you see with the people that we deal with constantly with an overall attitude perspective? I mean, what is it?
There's no attitude in Vegas.
No.
Yeah, right.
No,
Oh.
no, none at all.
No, I mean, it's just everybody thinks that they're experts, right? I mean, there's so much information out there, which is a great thing, but
Yeah.
remember, a little bit of knowledge is enough to do a lot of damage,
Yeah.
a little enough to be dangerous. And uh, especially when you have a client that's asking for your advice, but they're not really looking for your advice. It's confirmation bias. They want you to reaffirm what they think the answer is, and anything that goes contrary to it, if you're not speaking from a position of authority and confidence, they're going to walk all over it. I mean, we see our agents all the time. That's probably the number one thing we deal with is problem buyers, problem sellers. And
Yep.
it all could have been avoided if there was trust from the beginning.
Yeah. Yep. I agree. So you have the attitude from the other side of it, and it's a good one to bring up, where the client does feel like they know better or knows more. And I'm like, I don't know how you got to that conclusion, especially if the agent's been doing it for 10 to 15 years, and all of a sudden you've never done it before, and you feel like your input's going to really change this. It's an attitude. It's an attitude that they
Hey,
believe.
Robert.
Yeah.
I think a lot of that attitude comes from, the media we're on right now. And quite honestly, I run into it on a day-to-day basis. You and I are both instructors.
Yeah.
And we stand in a classroom or get online with 200 to 300 people a month or in a session. And I can tell you quite honestly, 2/3 of them in the room or in that session are not paying one bit of attention to what we're telling them because they already know everything.
Yeah.
Because they've
Or they're
internet.
going through the motions. That's even
Oh,
worse.
yeah.
Going through the motions of
Yeah.
someone said, hey, you should do this. And it's just there. And, it is tough. And I'm in front of large groups of people all the time. And it
Yep.
doesn't matter whether it's my guys at school in some type of presentation. Most of the people out there, their level of paying attention to that person that's talking to them, it's almost like you want to say, well, why were you sitting there? Why'd you come? Because it should have been because the person that's talking is the one that you wanted to listen to. Yet now your eyes are dropping, you're sleeping or whatever, or you're disagreeing. I'm like, why'd you come? I mean, I don't get it. I mean, you were there for a reason. And I like that example because that too is the attitude side of it. The attitude side of, why are you off? I thought you came to learn. Yeah, it's a terrible reference, but it's I'm like the king of B-rated movies. It's like
There you go.
It's like in Karate Kid 3 where he's making him hit the boards and stuff, and he starts complaining. He goes, "Did you come here to be taught or to be to teach?" I mean, because it's a stupid analogy, but it's true. I mean, you're just like, what makes you think that attitude is the one that you should have? I mean, if the person's an idiot that's talking, that's one thing. I mean, if it's someone who's not of the level of expertise, that's a problem. I would actually argue that's your fault then for not researching who's talking more, because you shouldn't have ever been in that situation where this guy's going to be an idiot. Why am I here? You should have gone through the motions of, hey, whoever I'm listening to, I'm here for a reason, and I'm going to listen. But it's not that way. I'd be hypocritical if I've got someone. So I've been saying, if it's someone that has my experience or more, I want to listen to them. And I'm not talking about having much more experience than someone else. When I separate, I'm talking about someone who just walked into something versus I'm not talking about if someone is 7 or 8 years versus 20 or 30. There's some of the people that have done it for 7 or so years that are superior. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about someone who walks in and thinks they become an expert. So I want to make that clear. But even for me, though, and I told you, I'm never hypocritical. I'll sit through sessions where someone who has a higher expertise than me, and I'll start in on, that's so stupid. They don't know. And I sometimes have to back up and go, well, they do know a lot more about that than I do. Maybe I have the wrong attitude right now. Maybe I should stop and just listen a little more and be open to what they're saying. And I like to use my downfalls to anybody And because I believe, we're all human. And I think if you don't show that you have downfalls, that you think you're just perfect. And I'm far from it.
You should see Robert when he walks into a Dickie's barbecue. It's just
Well,
Wait a minute.
First of all, you'd never see Robert walk into a Dickie's barbecue.
ever,
That's true.
ever,
That's true.
ever.
Do you know the other part of this is the other word that's missing from this title is, it's attitude and perspective, because you're going to get an attitude from 5 different people who you got a broker that's done it 20 years. You got an agent that's done it 4 years,
Like
10
that.
years. You got an investor that's bought 100 homes. Everybody's got a different perspective on what their attitude should be. And they all have been on the opposite side of the transaction, whereas an agent or a broker sees both. So it's a different perspective about the same attitude.
Yeah, Mike, that's a great freaking comment. In fact, if I could go back and change it, I would, because the more I think about it, especially in some of my personal issues, that is the exact problem. It becomes the perception. And what I really love about that comment, because it's got the true heart and soul of this issue today. The problem is that the perception is off. The attitude is going to fit the perception. And that attitude, if it's geared towards that perception, you're screwed one way or the other, because now you're on 2 different planes. You're on 2 different planes and you're trying to argue the same thing, where someone has a visual of something different, but you're talking about the same thing. And I personally, that is the roughest situation to be in, because you're arguing with somebody who thinks that they're right because they're perceiving something way different than what you do. Now you get into, when it comes to that,
They could even be partially right.
well, so but you also get into, why is there perception because there's something warped with them, or is there something warped with you? And that's where you really start getting, because you have to, and I find myself doing this all the time. Anytime I start getting into something with somebody, I back off and I go, is it possible that they're right with this? Is there anything that they're saying that is remotely close? Now, I am very bad about, once I have ruled to myself that they're wrong, I'm like, they are the idiot. And I am tired of this conversation, and I'll gear it. I'll be the one that guides it. But that is only after I've reflected on myself. I go, am I sure? Am I sure there's nothing I'm missing before? And I know that I've already identified something that the other person has admitted. That a lot of times it helps me with the perception. When that person acknowledges what I would say, I'm like, well, that proves to me then their perspective is because of that. And they already admitted it was wrong. So now I'm not going to give much legitimacy to this. So that is a great conversation, because I do believe that is one of the channeling problems, is that some people are talking about the same thing, and they do believe in emotionally they're correct, but their perception's off. And because the perception's off, that attitude is going to reflect that perception. That is a great freaking comment. It applies to so much. I mean, if you really look at almost every disagreement, argument, or just not happy about how someone's performing, it can probably be geared towards that. There's probably something in there that says, well, I thought I was going to do this, but you're doing that. And then the attitude reflects it.
Well, and I think too, it depends. Like, let's say, you're dealing with, if you're a listing agent, you're dealing with a buyer or vice versa. As long as that other person isn't just being a jerk, right? Trying to just be mean, reminding your clients and yourself that everybody wants the same thing here, right? Those people want to buy that house. These people want to sell it. So let's just accomplish the goal.
Yeah, you're seeing too, this is exactly what I was talking about, Brent's attitude at the beginning. And he knows well documented with why I think the way I do about him in there. But that comment he just made is exactly what I'm saying. In the end, if our attitude is, hey, look, we all want this to work out the correct way, then everybody's going to make the effort to do it. But when you get that attitude in there that's contradicting that they have a different agenda or a different perspective, now you are dealing with, hey, look, this is going to become a fight that shouldn't have been there. And it is because of someone's attitude that's causing it. I mean, attitude really does reflect most of the issues we have. It's the response back, whether it's emotional or it's factual. the response that's coming back is usually going to be the difference on, is this going to be a positive or a negative conversation?
And to throw on top of that, it's one of those situations that you need to try to be a little bit empathetic, and where are they right now, and what's the emotions involved? We're dealing with a lot of people who are, okay, I'm going to just say it, of a more mature level nowadays.
Yeah.
And this may be we're dealing with one right now in a transaction without getting into too much depth. This lady is trying to liquidate the estate of her family, and it was built by them originally in 1971. They are the only owners ever. And she had to go through the entire process of dealing with her siblings and go through the emotion of liquidating her mom and dad's estate and so forth. And they haven't updated it in many, many years, but she's having a hard time turning loose. And so you don't want to lose patience with somebody like that.
Yeah, because her
Even
attitude is reflective of that right now. I mean, it's reflective
Bingo.
of a hard time she's going through.
Yes.
You know, at that point, you were much more polite than I'll be on. But it's a different conversation, but it's not.
Sure.
The other thing that we suffer from is it's not just of what you said, empathetic, which I love. I try. Most people do not think I'm an empathetic guy, which is really crushing to me, because I don't think there's anybody that's more empathetic than me. I try very hard.
Just the pathetic part.
I didn't argue that. I just said empathetic is true too. But I try very hard to make sure that what's the other side going through. I mean, most of the people who are really close to me know I try very hard to make sure everybody's happy around me. I want them to be. And that is why it is a crushing blow when someone is not happy. I'm like, how is it that you're like the only one out of the rest of these people that know me, that all I do is try to make it right, and all of a sudden I'm like the biggest villain or the worst person? How the F did we get here? You know, and for me,
what do you mean you're not happy?
I know. I mean, how did this happen? You know, it's funny you said that, because that's exactly the perception. But the reality is, everybody who knows me does know I'm trying very hard to make everybody happy. How did that person get to where I'm sitting there trying to make everybody happy? But this one is such a gripe or a vice on me. And
then he moves to Vegas. I mean,
Boom. There you go.
That is freaking awesome. You know, the one I'm trying to get to is because there's so much mental health issues in the country, that is distorting to when Gary talks about empathy. That is making it very hard, where you're trying to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, and I'm like, I can't. I have no idea what that person is going through because of their mental status right now. It's clear that there's something wrong, but I don't know what it is, and I don't know how it can be fixed. Most doctors don't know how it can be fixed, and that makes it a very big struggle, because the conversations are geared towards two different planes, two different realities, and it makes it very hard for whatever goal is trying to be accomplished that gets accomplished, because you really are arguing it. I don't want to say it like this because it's not true, but it kind of is. You're having an argument that will never be won by either side. Both sides are going towards a goal that they're like, I know I'm right, they're wrong.
Mm-hmm.
It's never going to go anywhere. And whereas what Brent said a minute ago, that the positive attitude in all of us is like, look, what do we need to do to get it done? You can have that, but if you've got the other one that is on a plane that is so different, like, well, that's never going to happen because of what they're doing. No matter how positive we are, it is not going to fix that problem. That is something professionally and personally that I go through, and I think a lot of other people go through too. And it comes down to the attitude. Now, we've been talking about for the first, most part of the show, the attitude side. Is it, what role are you in when you say that? What gave you the entitlement to say that? How is it affecting the conversations that we're doing? And that was the most important point I wanted to make today. But there's no way I'm not going to finish the last 15 or 20 minutes of this without discussing the more obvious type of attitude, and it is the optimistic versus the pessimistic. I'm quoted many times, and I think it would be on my epitaph, that I cannot stand the negative attitude of somebody. I just cannot stand it. It takes and sips every bit amount of effing air out of a room. It deflates any type of conversation that's trying to be had. It deflates everybody's feelings that are in there that, hey, this day's good. Now it sucks because of this person. In my opinion, it's the worst possible thing you could ever be given. And I shouldn't say that or develop, because I think it's hard to teach somebody to have a good attitude. That one consumes me, and I think most everybody else on a daily basis. And it's funny. It's not funny. It's ironic, we should say. It's ironic. Whatever side of the fence you're on. And I do believe there's a fence. I do believe there are positive people and there are negative people. I don't believe that the negative person can truly be positive. That sounds stupid, right? But I believe that. And if they are historically negative, even if they have a good day, I'm like, they are still a negative person.
Mm-hmm.
I go, they are still capable of sucking the air out of the room if things don't go their way. And I think that's the ultimate problem with someone with a negative attitude. The positive attitude person, normally when they have their negative episode, there's a reason why they have the negative episode. They're not just doing it for feeling wise. They're doing it because something has been done wrong and it needs to be corrected. There's a difference between the two.
I always try to stay, keep that positive outlook. But when you've got a seller, you kind of have to be more pessimistic with them to keep their expectations low until we've closed, right? You don't want them to be overexcited, over the moon. Hey, we're under contract. Let's start packing. We're going to move. Like, hey, we've got all these obstacles to hit. Let's not get excited. Keep those emotions low. And that's a hard thing for me, right? Because I want to be excited with them, but
I think you're right. You are. I think you're
Correct.
bordering the line of, is it bad attitude? Is it negative, or is it expectation? I don't think it's wrong to use a negative expectation to create a positive vibe, because that negative expectation, I always use the quote, well, if I look at everything negatively, it can only be positive that comes from it. Well, sometimes in that type of situation, the positive vibe, you have to do the negative vibe to get to it. And that's why I'm saying, and your comment was a perfect lead into that, because that's the point I'm making with it. The positive person can do that, but the negative person can never do it the opposite way. That person is always going to be capable. And if you think in your life, if you think about the people that surround you, those closest to you, those friends, those business people, every one of you right now can profile that person and go, bad attitude, good attitude, bad attitude. You wouldn't even hesitate. I don't think there's anybody that I know that I'd be like, yeah, you think about that too. It's either a yes, they are, no, they are not. And to me, the no, you are not are the people that get avoided. I can tell you in my life, that is the person that is removed in the most forceful way I can do in my mind. Whatever
Legally.
block I can do. I didn't say, that's what I said in my mind. Get out of my
I know what you're thinking,
Yeah. They are going to be ostracized from anything that I have. I don't want them near me in any way. I don't want them walking by me. I don't want texts or calls from that person. I want there to be such a limited basis. I mean, personally, I'd rather them go away. I'm talking to you understand, these are people that I would want to go away, but the only way I'm going to be able to do that is to say, get lost. And I don't believe in that. But that same person, though, I'm going to do everything I can, because I'm like, my environment's not going to be toxic because yours is. I'm just not going to let it happen. I don't care what your problem is. I'm just not going to let it invade mine. And that's the problem with most negative people, whether it's intentional or not. That's another problem too. A lot of people with a negative attitude, it's not necessarily their fault. I do believe that some of the mental health issues in this country are affecting that attitude. And it's probably the most painful thing, to know that someone's causing you problems, but you know it's not their fault. But what to do with that person is very difficult. And I'm talking about all facts of my life, every piece of it, business, personal. That's the hardest thing to deal with. You're like, I know that that's not what's meant, but I'm just not going to endure it. And that's a great word too. I think endurance is probably the biggest gut check for anybody, as to how much will I endure? How much is it that I can accept or take to where it doesn't break me down? And I think there are so many people in our lives that we have to look at. Look, that's why I don't talk to that person very often. But if it's someone that's closer day to day, you're like, I don't have a choice. So what is it that I have to do? I think that's a big struggle when it comes to the attitude side of it, because a negative vibe, no matter what that person says, in their mind, they're like, I just made a comment. I'm like, yeah, but it was awful. It destroyed everything that we're trying to do. Now, the second side of this, and Brent was kind of hinting at it, where he was talking about whether he's pessimistic or is he trying to achieve a goal. The second side of this is, are we dealing with somebody who it's their opinion? Is their opinion, because we don't like it, is it viewed as pessimistic? So that's a tough one, because that's where you start getting into I'm right and you're wrong. And that's an arrogant person that does that. But
you could also have a strong-willed person that's right.
That's exactly, you're right. You're absolutely
They're
correct.
not really, they're right. And they're going to push that on you, even though you agree that they're right.
Yep. I know exactly what you're saying. And I think
same with if they're wrong.
Yeah. I think that's one of many dimensions that I'm going through right now, talking with you about, because if someone makes an opinion that is pessimistic, is it because they're a pessimistic person? So we're talking about someone who is almost always pessimistic. And that person almost every time, even if they do say something positive, I'm like, I'm not going to listen to it because historically I just don't want to hear it. But there are some people that are optimistic, but maybe they disagree with you. And that's where I think that fine line is. That fine line of, hey, look, are they disagreeing because they just have an attitude? Or are they disagreeing with because, no, that's what you're saying is wrong. And what I'm saying, and those are things to me. I am more the strong-willed person that says, no, I know it. But I can also tell you too, I'm the first one. If I'm wrong, I'm the first one that tells somebody, and you better believe it. It's not something Dina enjoys very much, because I'm like, it doesn't happen often, because she doesn't like that. But I will tell you, if it is, believe me, I'm the first one. I'm not the one that thinks I'm always right. I'm the first one to go, God, I was off on that. What was it? Oh yeah, this completely, it has nothing to do with anything, but I'm not even a big sports guy, but I did say it last night. That's why I was thinking about it. They had some type of special on Jalen Hurts or whatever, and he was walking through. I'm like, boy, did I have that one wrong. I was like, I thought that guy was the biggest flake, and it was going to be the biggest joke. I mean, like, and here he is now, probably the next coming of a Michael Jordan from a football standpoint. But that's a sillier one, because I would like to use business. But I can tell you, like, when I saw it, I was the first one. I'm like, wrong. Like, you were wrong on that guy. So you get into this conversation that if they disagree with you, is it because they're being negative, or are they trying to make a point? I think that's where the real battle becomes. If it's the negative person that does it, but then the positive person also says, well, they're right on that, then you're like, well, look, I mean, don't just completely discount them, but it's a very fine line to walk. It's hard to determine, look, are they doing that because they have a selfish agenda? And you get a lot of selfishness that sometimes becomes a problem. Selfishness affects attitude. Someone basing their opinion off of something that's geared towards them. And anybody that says anything that deters from that, that person's a jerk. So I'm going to be a jerk to them. But whether it's intentional or it's even instinctive wise, I do think a person that digs themselves into they dig their feet into the ground and they don't like the topic, no matter what you say, they're going to be against. That doesn't mean that person's a negative person. It just means that they disagree. I think those conversations are the toughest ones, because now you're really trying to identify, is that person really just taking the air out of the room, or do they really have a beef with what it is that we're doing? And I think most people spend a lifetime trying to identify, hey, look, is this person really, like Brent said, are we really trying to fix this? Or are we trying to just be problematic? Because some people are being problematic no matter what they do. That I will say a big pet peeve I have, and I think Gary mentioned a little while ago, when someone is so far off the topic, I'm like, that has no relevance to what we're doing right now. It is zero. You have an emotional, personal, but it is not going to in one way help what we're trying to do. One thing that I've done better as I've gotten older is when I used to be the one that was much more aggravated and vicious back to someone verbally if they were like that to me. But with the amount of people I've had over the years and the amount of, quite honestly, the amount of shit I've had to take, we actually talked about this at the beginning too. I have learned the better way to respond is I'm like, that's not going to get us anywhere. I go, we are going nowhere with you raising your voice. I can promise you, you yelling at me ain't going to do a damn bit of good. I go, in fact, and this is what I was talking about, where it reminded me earlier, it just makes you look foolish. That's why I tried to start backing off, because when I started, I'm like, you're caving in. I go, now you're basically acting like they wanted you to act. And all you should have done is saying, look, I'm just not going to take that route. That attitude, as I've gotten older, has helped, because it really does. The person who is negative or aggressive, it's basically telling them, go ahead, do what you want to do, but it will not change my thoughts or opinions on this. Sometimes they back away because they actually see themselves like, oh, I'm tired of yelling about this. And I'm like, good, because you're wasting your time. It's not going to go anywhere. That is something that's very opposite when I was younger, how I would have reacted to how I react today. I mean, I've had some of the worst things happen to me in the last couple of weeks. I mean, that are just gut wrenching. But he'll tell you, he's even been there and seen it. We're in my face. He knows what I'm about to say. Well, he usually hears it after too, but he knows I won't break down in front of somebody because I know it's not going to change it. I mean, actually, Brent could be the first way. That's not even the point of this conversation today, but now I'm thinking about it. I like to believe I practice what I preach, and Brent saw a really good dose of that this week, because it's probably as painful of a shot as you can take at me. We both saw it at the same time, and the reaction was, but that's not what came out. It was like, all right. I go, something's wrong. Something's wrong here. And I backed away from it because I needed time to think about it.
He missed Dollar Shrimp Night at Sizzler. So
God. I like Dollar Shrimp Night, even if it's popcorn shrimp.
I found that I will actually call somebody a jackass in the same tone that I'll tell them they're right.
Yeah.
See, I think that that's a great quality you have.
Yeah.
I think that one of your greatest traits is that you are able to keep the same tone, whether it's serious or very upset or just joking. It never changes with you. So you probably don't know this, but with someone like that, it means that you really listen, you take what they're saying to heart, because you're like, well, he might be being very serious. Now, the problem with you is then you're like, I think he was joking, but you have to process it. It has to go.
They never really know.
That's right. They don't. But you'd rather that. You'd rather at least you're taking that person seriously. Like, hey, look, he said that, But then like, oh no, he's clearly joking. At least you're listening. There are some people like, oh, they won't even start listening because like, oh, whatever, he doesn't know, or he's laughing or he's joking. So it's a good trait he has. And
it's a great deflator to another level of hostility because everybody kind of thinks that, okay, was he kidding?
Yeah.
Or was he serious? Or maybe both.
I'll tell him I'm serious.
Yeah. And then smile like that. Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah. He'd be excellent in confrontation because he will give you his opinion. But it's never going to come out. I mean, I honestly, I've been around Mike where it's never gotten bad, but I can see it where if it was bad, I know how he would handle it. And it's pretty superior. That it's hard to maintain your composure when you have someone that's, they're negative. They're impressing something upon you that's not right. They're getting at you, just like me and Brent were talking about a minute ago. There's something to be said for being able to keep your composure. Mike's a composure guy for sure. There's no doubt. I mean, I think Mike is very fortunate that he doesn't have to go through some of the most terrible things, at least, with other people. Personally, I know you've had, and I actually think your attitude's the same no matter what you go through. But with other people, it's a gift because it's hard to keep your composure with some of the people. And, I think that's a great way to wrap this particular session up, because if you really look at it, what we're talking about, it is how the attitude affects what we're doing, how we're living. And if the end result becomes a bad one, whether it's attitude or not, different planes, expectations, or perceptions, in the end, if it is something we really disagree with, the attitude, it's usually more of the positive person than it is the negative attitude. They're going to know how to keep their composure and walk away from it, which is why I do think the positive attitude person is superior. That's a kind of a stupid comment because it should be the obvious. But sometimes you have to be told that because that person knows better. They know that, look, I'm not going to continue this. I'm not going to continue wasting my time and effort on it because the attitude you're having, whether it's right or wrong, is never going to accomplish the goal that we're trying to achieve. And that's why I thought all the conversations were great because it all ties into that one particular point. I want to thank everybody for watching. Like I said, it's great to be back again. Love to be back. It's 2 shows in a row where we hadn't done them in 4 or 5 months. So great to be back. Great topics. I love this one more than anything. Like I said, this is a personal, it is the number one item that I put up as far as judging somebody, and it is their attitude, because if they can't get past that, I don't really care what the rest of them has to say. I honestly don't. Whether you think that that's okay or not, that's fine. I can tell you though, if their attitude's bad, there's really nothing else going forward for me on it. I want to thank you guys always. This is some of my closest friends anyways. We would talk about this stuff anyways, whether we work together or not. So I want to thank you guys for your time. And like I said, anybody out there, this particular episode, you could pass on to anybody, whether it's new agent, whether it's probably more for experienced agents than anything. I think it would be time well spent, because these are over, 35 years or so of issues for me that I've gone through and seen. I've supervised and continue to supervise a lot of people. I would think it's relevant, some of the stuff that we're telling you, that we've learned how to deal this through hardcore experience. So hope it helped you out. You guys take care. We'll talk to y'all soon. We'll definitely see y'all next month. Y'all have a good one. Take care.
This was a Lunatic Digital production. Visit lunaticdigital.com for all your digital needs.